money on the war. To raise more money, Great Britain's leaders decided to tax American colonists. The Stamp Act of 1765 placed a tax on paper goods such as newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. Taxes such as these greatly upset colonists. The colonists also felt they did not have a way to voice their concerns in the British government. The British government added more taxes. In 1767, the Townshend Acts taxed items such as paint, glass, lead, and British tea. The taxes led some colonists to respond with violence. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists boarded 3 ships in Boston, Massachusetts. They destroyed an entire shipment of British tea. They dumped much of it overboard. The event was called the Boston Tea Party. The British government reacted by creating a new set of laws colonists called the Intolerable Acts. The laws reinforced British control over the colonies. The laws also weakened the colonial government in Massachusetts. Despite the laws, colonists in Massachusetts formed the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. This government became a statement of independence for the colonists. British leaders were increasingly worried the colonists might rebel. So the British government instructed General Thomas Gage to start disarming colonial militias. Gage was also told to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. These men were leaders of a group called the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty felt the colonists should break free from British rule. Joseph Warren was another leader of the Sons of Liberty. He had spies among the British military who learned of Gage's orders. Warren sent fellow revolutionary Paul Revere to Concord on April 8, 1775. Revere warned Concord's leaders that the British were planning to march to the town and seize the militia supplies. Revere's message allowed colonists to spread the supplies into homes and shops in nearby towns. On the evening of April 18, 1775, Warren received word that British troops were assembling in Boston. They were headed across the Charles River toward Lexington. It was the moment the Sons of Liberty had been waiting for. Warren needed to make sure the militias were ready to stand their ground. Taxes in the colonies. April 5, 1764. Sugar Act enforces a tax on sugar and molasses. The act also cuts the supply of non-British sources of these items. March 22, 1765. Stamp Act creates taxes on paper goods and requires colonists to print on paper produced in Great Britain. May 15, 1765. Quartering Act requires colonists to pay for British soldier supplies and housing in the colonies. October 1765. Colonial leaders gather and declare the Stamp Act unconstitutional. March 18, 1766. British Parliament issues the Declaratory Act, repealing the Stamp Act, but upholding Britain's right to tax colonists. June 29, 1767. Townshend Acts tax paper, tea, glass, and other items to pay for administrative duties associated with running the colonies. Approximately 700 British soldiers marched into Lexington, Massachusetts. The soldiers wore bright red uniforms and marched in a long column. 3 officers led the way on horseback. The soldiers were on their way to Concord, Massachusetts. The British controlled all 13 of the American colonies, but the British had heard that an American militia might rise up against British rule. The militia was hiding military supplies in Concord. British soldiers were on their way to destroy these supplies. The soldiers marched into the center of Lexington. There, across a small field, nearly 80 armed colonists stood in a line. A British officer shouted at the militiamen, telling them to lay down their weapons and return to their homes. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. People on both sides panicked. Amid the confusion, British soldiers fired on the colonists. Most of the colonists ran for their lives, but a few returned fire. The British ran forward with their bayonets out. By the time the battle was over, 8 colonists had received wounds that would take their lives.